Hi everyone, this is meteorologist Joel Curtis with your Alaska Weather TV show. Starting out with our satellite image, there are no watches, warnings, and advisories in effect around the state today. We do have a couple of low pressure systems, one in the Gulf and one at the very north end of Chillicothe Strait. That second one in the north is really hard to see. And then high pressure across the Arctic in the North Slope. And then onshore flow in southeast Alaska is giving some precip and a little bit of wind over there too. So for today's weather, there's our two lows, 982 millibars on both of them. A frontal system wrapped around that southern low with some warm air surging onshore, a lot of rain and not a whole lot of snow in southeast Alaska, but various spots around southeast have the wind blowing. Also some wind along the North Gulf Coast and a little bit of snow as with the onshore flow and upslope. And then very light snow showers out over the Bering Sea in that northerly flow that comes down all the way from the Bering Strait and then hops the Alaska Peninsula and some more snow showers to the south. For tonight's weather, that low to the south weakens pretty rapidly down up to 992 millibars. And again, that warm front is kind of working really slow. It is not very strong. Still some rain in southeast Alaska. And note the very weak front falling to pieces over south central and on into the eastern interior. Not much to speak of going on with that front. But again, that northerly flow down through the Bering Strait. And then for Thursday's weather, now that low to the south starts to develop just a little bit and a new front wraps around it as the air it comes into the backside on the cool side of that low. And then we have a very weak low over the central interior, about 999 millibars. And then that low that was over Chillicothe Strait has now slid south into the Gulf. So we've got a little bit of low pressure, but note the 1038 millibar high pressure in Siberia that's pushing the wind down through through the Bering Strait and down into the Bering Sea. And then by Friday, that low starts to really redevelop down to 972 millibars and the front well wrapped around that system. Again, onshore flow for southeast, the North Gulf Coast, and even the western Gulf, and snow showers in that onshore flow as that high surges to the south and is now over the Bering Sea at 1039 millibars. So looking at our temperatures Thursday morning in the negative teens, down to minus 25 for dead horse along the north slope, and then it just gradually a little bit warmer as you get further and further south until finally you get to southeast Alaska where the temperatures in Thursday morning will be almost to 40 degrees in a lot of spots. Still, as you go down the Alaska Peninsula, temperatures in the teens and 20s as you get out into the Aleutians, 16 for the Pribilofs, but still rather cool in the southwest and along the west coast. And then for our high temperatures on Thursday afternoon, again, single digits below zero, down to minus 12 for dead horse. As you get further south, Fort Yukon plus 14, Fairbanks plus 26, Nome plus 8. And then as we get into south central, temperatures in the 20s and 30s, and the mid-30s for a lot of south central. And then over towards southeast Alaska, temperatures into the 40s, as well as you go out the Alaska Peninsula, temperatures in the 20s and 30s, and then 23 for the Pribilofs. And then for our low temperatures Friday morning, just a slight bit of warming there. Temperatures minus 25 at Dead Horse, but minus 10 at Point Hope. And then as we get down to Nome, minus 6. Fairbanks plus 2. And in the southwest, still single digits on the plus side for our low temperatures. Finally, in south central, you'll see some readings in the teens, but also in the 20s as we get further south, and well into the 30s in southeast Alaska. Then going out the Alaska Peninsula, 20s along the Alaska Peninsula, and 25, 30 degrees as you go out the Aleutian Chain. And then for Friday afternoon, still negative temperatures along the north slope. As we get down to Fairbanks, plus 26, Nome plus 6. And then in south central, a lot of readings in the 30s. And then getting over to southeast Alaska in the 40s. Going out the Alaska Peninsula again in the 20s. So in our 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for March 22nd through March 26th, issued today, we see normal temperatures in that 6 to 10 day range, except for a pretty good chance of above normal temperature for the Panhandle. And then our 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook for March 22nd through March 26th, pretty much on the dry side for all of northern and northwestern Alaska. And then as we get down to south central, the southern half of the state, a somewhat chance of above normal precipitation all the way from Bristol Bay on over to Northway and then down into southeast Alaska. So, folks, that wraps up our public segment, and please stay safe out there and be careful. Thanks for tuning in.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi, everyone. This is meteorologist Joel Curtis with your aviation weather. Starting out with the flying weather Thursday morning, we've got some extensive areas of IFR all along the Gulf Coast, all the way from Kennedy Entrance up through Prince William Sound, across Yakutat Bay, and over into southeast Alaska. A lot of marginal VFR around the state, a couple of pockets of IFR in the upcountry, in the upper Yukon area, and over the Alaska Range. And then for our flying weather Thursday afternoon, we have some IFR up in the Yukon Flats area, as well as along the Gulf Coast from the Kenai Peninsula on over to almost to Cape Spencer. Also a little bit in Lower Cook Inlet, as well as out in the Gulf, and a little bit in southwest Alaska. Fairly decent swath of marginal VFR over the Bering Sea. And then for Friday morning, extensive area of IFR all the way from the Pribilofs on up into the upper Yukon area and a little bit over the Alaska Range. Plus we have some IFR over the North Slope, marginal VFR across much of the southern and northern parts of the state. Only the West Coast is showing some VFR. And then for Friday afternoon, IFR again over Kodiak Island, Lower Cook Inlet, and all the way up to Prince William Sound, as well as the southern Panhandle, and a little bit over the Alaska Peninsula. So for our pass conditions on Thursday, Anaktuvuk Pass, marginal VFR becoming VFR. Adigan, marginal VFR to VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, both IFR becoming marginal VFR in the afternoon. Rainy Pass, marginal VFR. Windy Pass, marginal VFR. Isabel Pass, IFR becoming marginal VFR. Mentasta Pass, marginal VFR. Tanita Pass, IFR. Portage Pass, IFR. And Chilkoot and White Pass, both marginal VFR throughout the day. For freezing levels Thursday morning, at the surface for almost the entire state, a little bit above the surface for Baranof Island and down to Prince of Wales Island, and then up to 2,000 feet, barely touching the southern end of Prince of Wales Island. And then for our icing on Thursday, we have a large area of isolated moderate between 3,000 and 10,000 feet from southeast Alaska all along the North Gulf Coast, southern Kenai Peninsula, and on over to Kodiak Island and Lake Iliamna. And for our jet stream on Thursday, we've got an upper low over the northern Alaska Peninsula, about a 65-knot jet down from Siberia across the Bering Sea down through the eastern Aleutians, and then a little bit of westerlies over the Panhandle. And then for our 9,000 winds are picking up with a upper level low just south of the Alaska Peninsula, around 65 knots coming off the Alaska Peninsula, but mostly in the 40s and 50s out into the Gulf and over the Bering Sea, and a little bit of 45 knots as you get up to northern southeast Alaska. And then for our 3,000-foot winds, 20 to 25 knots coming in through the northern southeast. And then around our couple of lows, both near Kodiak Island and then out in the Gulf, 45 to 50 knots around those lows. And then about 50 knots through the Bering Strait in the northerlies. And then for our turbulence on Thursday, we have one area of surface to 5,000 feet from roughly Cordova over to Cape Spencer. Also, we have some surface to 6,000 feet well out into the Gulf. But the main areas to look for turbulence on Thursday, we've got surface to 3,000 feet coming down through the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island, and also an area of low-level winds that pick up from roughly the same latitude as the Pribilofs down across the Alaska Peninsula and in the Dutch Harbor area. One area of considerable moderate turbulence in that area, surface to 4,000 feet. So be sure to get a pilot weather briefing for all of your flights out there, and do watch the weather. Lots of weather available on the AKwx site on the internet. And don't forget to file a flight plan. And please do fly safe out there. Thanks for tuning in.
When I first started working here in the early 90s, this is where the glacier was. I mean, where we're walking right now would have been a pile of gravel that had been pushed up by the glacier, and then we would have had 100 to 200 foot high cliffs of ice right here. And as you can see, that's changed quite a bit. And if you look at that in 2 dimensions, you can sort of see the turbulence used to be here, now it's back there. That gives you one measure. What that kind of 2-dimensional look doesn't show is how much mass has been lost, that the glacier has just sort of deflated. These 200-foot cliffs of ice have disappeared and pulled back to this gentle sloping glacier you see now.
When I was working in Kenai Fjords National Park, I used the topographic maps to navigate where I was, and I realized that the mapping of the glaciers was really off. The glaciers had receded a lot. There were new rivers and lakes that were establishing where the ice used to be or should have been according to the maps. And so then I did a study on this and found out that we had a 5% loss of glacier ice mass in the Kenai Fjords area between 1950 and 1985. Big change.
You know, one of the most compelling things we do, though, to document glacier change is simply take photographs. We've had repeat photography projects here at the park. They may not give you the most accurate data in terms of how much mass or real specific measurements, but what they do give you is a visual representation that can't be argued with. I mean, it really requires no interpretation.
Understanding what's happening, understanding these processes, and possibly being able to predict what's going to happen in the future is the best that we can do, and that requires science and research.
There's considerable research on climate change in Alaska. The most significant, I would say right now, is the Natural Resources Inventory and Monitoring Program, which is looking at change across a wide variety of vital signs or indicators.
Kenai Fjords National Park is actually a pretty good representation of what's going on globally with regards to glacier ice retreat. There have been studies showing that mountain glaciers are retreating all over the planet. There are probably well over 90% of the glaciers are in retreat status. There are a few that are advancing, and some are holding, their terminus point. But the Kenai fjords, the tidewater glaciers are retreating more dramatically, but even the land-based glaciers in the terminus positions are retreating. It's pretty common for all the mountain glaciers. The big mountain glaciers in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, they're mostly in retreat too. We're really entering an interesting phase where what we call the cryosphere, the ice on the planet, is melting.
You know, in the more immediate past, it's clear that since the Pleistocene, glaciers have been retreating. So the idea that glaciers retreat is is no revelation. They've been retreating from across North America for the last 10,000 years. What appears to have changed and what has people's attention is the rate at which they're retreating. In the case of Exit Glacier, we have scientists who've been looking at it. We have evidence that the glaciers left behind, where we can track that retreat for about the last 200 years. And we can say with confidence that in the last decade, that rate has increased.
Terminus mapping is a great way to map a small portion of the ice field. We come out twice a year and we use a GPS to walk the edge of the terminus and map the farthest extent of Exit Glacier. And that allows us to see what type of changes are occurring over the winter accumulation period and the summer ablation period. With that data, that can help us as we witness these changes within the ice field, we can hopefully be able to correlate that with the weather data that we have.
When you look at an ice field that's 750 square miles, when you look at a glacier that towers hundreds of feet high, you get a sense of permanence. You think these things are massive, they're somehow a permanent sort of feature, and yet in a very short period of time, in a matter of a couple of decades, we've seen dramatic change in those things.
At Exit Glacier, we have a time-lapse camera set up on the glacier that allows us to take a couple of photos every single day, and then to put that sequence of photos into a video where we can see changes of the glacier and the vegetation phenology throughout an entire year.
Virtually all the glaciers in Alaska are receding. Some glaciers are moving forward. That's not an indication that they're actually growing in size. It's just the rate at which they're slipping down the mountain.
In some cases, some of these glaciers are receding back up onto land, and so they're producing less ice. When you change a glacier system, you're changing habitat for marine mammals and other wildlife. And the populations of harbor seals have dropped dramatically in the fjords. In 1980, shortly after the establishment of the park, in Island Bay, we had maybe 1,500 harbor seals. Nowadays, it's a few hundred.
In Arctic environments, much of the sunlight that reaches the Earth bounces back because it hits snow and reflects off into space, or ice on the ocean and reflects off into space. That's the albedo effect. When the snow thaws and instead you have rock or vegetation, or when the ice thaws and you have transparent ocean, the sunlight will convert to other wavelengths. It'll convert essentially to warmth. That does not bounce back into the atmosphere as much. So consequently, you get a warming of the ocean, you get a warming of the ground, you get a thawing of frozen soils or permafrost, you get a more rapid thawing of sea ice. So once the ice and once the snow is off of the surface, the rate of warming increases considerably.
If you're driving out to Exit Glacier, you'll actually start to see signs along the side of the road that have dates on them. Visitors sometimes are confused. They think they're elevations or something until they get up to the glacier and realize, oh, those were all date signs along the road that were telling me when the glacier was there. Another thing that's been happening in the Exit Glacier area in recent years is this flooding that comes at a time we're not used to. We're used to having maybe some flooding in the fall when we have a lot of heavy rain. This has suddenly been some flooding that's coming in the middle of the summer, usually not associated with precipitation events. It's associated with warmer weather and melting. When you walk down one of our trails that leads to Exit Glacier, there are a number of ways to get out there, but what used to be the main route is no longer really the main route because of the way the glacier has changed. So this main route to the glacier used to provide dramatic views of the glacier as you walk towards it. In fact, there was a large kiosk built at the end of this trail for people to stop and rest and enjoy the view of the glacier. Now, if they stop and rest at this kiosk, people think, why did the park put a kiosk here? Because it looks out at some shrubs. And there's no glacier within view anymore.
The way we solve big problems like this is not all at once. There's a thing called the Sokolov's wedges, and you just take a little bite of the pie, one sliver at a time. So we try to do incremental changes.
When we talk to people about our concerns about climate change, about the changes that are happening to the glacier, we also want to leave them with some idea of what we're doing to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. For example, here at the park, as we retire vehicles out of our fleet, we try to replace them with electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. We've done things like at the Glacier Nature Center, helping to sort of experiment and install a cutting-edge fuel cell, as opposed to running some traditional power source out there that relies on some sort of more greenhouse-producing gas.
My main hope for the future is that people get the message that the planet is changing fairly rapidly in places, particularly places like Kenai Fjords National Park, and that it is, we think, there's good evidence it's a result of atmospheric changes, which are measured in terms of human inputs into the atmosphere.
The rapid rate at which these glaciers are changing now offers us the opportunity to talk about this place as a way of looking into the future. In a lot of parts of the country, climate change issues are a little more subtle. And we can point here and say, look how fast this is changing. This is what the future holds for perhaps a lot of us and a lot of the planet as climate continues to change.
I'm optimistic that people and nature will adapt to change, but my expectation is that change will occur. Time will tell.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi everyone, and now for your marine forecast. Starting out with the sea ice edge 5-day forecast, expect some advancement toward the south due to the persistent northerlies all across the Bering Sea. Cook Inlet remains pretty much the same with fractured ice. For Thursday's marine forecast for southeast Alaska, southwesterlies on the outside 25 knots, seas up to 14 feet, and on the inside waters around 20 knots, a few gusts of 35, and seas up to 5 feet. And then as we get toward Yakutat Bay and Icy Bay, southeasterlies 20 knots, seas 10 feet. For Friday, looking at ramping up into gales, 35 to 40 knots on the outside, all out of the east or southeast, seas up to 18 feet, and then on the inside waters, a mixed bag of directions, but 15 to 30 knots, and down in Clarence Strait, expecting seas 6 feet. For the south central on Thursday, a mixed bag of directions, but around 20 knots on the outside, and also Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet. Seas up to 11 feet on the outside and up to 5 feet on the inside waters. For Friday's forecast, expect easterlies 35 to 40 knots on the outside, seas up to 17 feet, 20 knots out of the northeast for Prince William Sound. And then in northerlies in Cook Inlet, 25 to 35 knot gale force, and seas up to 9 feet in the southern end. For Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, we're looking at a mixed bag of directions on Thursday, but northwesterlies 35 gusting to 50, and seas up to 14 feet as you get down off of Sand Point. On the Bering Sea side, winds 10 knots in Bristol Bay, but gale force 35 knot northerlies and seas 14 feet off of Coal Bay. And then for Friday, all northwesterlies across the region. On the Pacific side, we've got ranging from 30 to 40 knots and seas up to 15 feet, but on the Bering Sea side, 20 to 30 knots and seas up to 13 feet off of Cold Bay. For the Aleutian chain, mostly northwesterlies in the eastern portions, ranging from a 20 to all the way up to 40 knots, seas up to 14 feet. And then in the western sections, 15 knots and seas 6 feet. On Friday's forecast for the Aleutian chain, generally northerlies except for easterlies in the far western Aleutians. Gale force, we're looking at winds ranging from 25 to 35 knots, and then seas up to 15 feet in the Bering Sea side and up to 13 feet on the Pacific side. For the west coast, winds ranging from 25 to 40 knots, mainly over the ice, but as you get down toward the Pribilofs, northerlies 30 knots and seas 11 feet. And then for Friday's forecast, again, those northerlies are very, very persistent, 25 to 35 knots and up to 40 knots as you get down off of Togiak, seas up to 14 feet in the Pribilofs. And then along the north slope, we're looking at westerlies generally ranging 5 to 20 knots. And as you get down to the Bering Strait, though, look for some gale force all the way up to 40 knots. And then for Friday, looking at 15 to 20 knots along the north slope and ranging 20 up to gale force 35 knots over the ice through the Bering Strait. So a recap of our weather, looking at a couple of low-pressure systems down in the Gulf and a very weakening front over south central and into Canada, and then some surge of warm air coming up to southeast. Then the front reforms on a 983 millibars in the Gulf, plus a couple of weak lows up into south central. We're expecting some snow up into the central interior, and then rain along the southeast Alaska coast. And then finally looking at Friday's weather, that low starts to redevelop to 972 millibars with strong northerlies in the Bering Sea, snow showers and snow all the way up into south central and spotty across the central interior, and then a surge of warm air up to the southeast Alaska. Well, folks, that's it for our public weather. Please stay safe out there.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.